Okay, Dion, we're going to start off. I told you I would show you how to take this step by step into making bread. So we're going to do the same thing that you did, taking the starter straight from the refrigerator, and you have to wake up the yeast and feed them again. So this can be, suppose you have a starter, you've used it, you've made your bread, and now you refed it and put it in the fridge. It can stay there for a couple of months and live off of what you fed them. Or you can keep using it every day and then just refeeding them. So we're going to start from the point of where we took it out of the fridge and we're reawakening the yeast. So here's a couple of jars of starter. And one is from the city of Tigard, where I used to live in Oregon, and one is from an Italian, or from Italy on an island that I purchased a long time ago, 2011. So one of the things you'll notice, if your yeast has been in the fridge for a while, if you take a close look, you'll see a little layer of fluid floating on the top of it. And that is just a byproduct. It's water and alcohol. It's called hooch. And I guess maybe that comes from people who used to drink it. I don't know. But anyway, you can see in my jar, this yeast has been in this jar for a long time. I've never replaced the yeast in the jar. I'll just dump some out or use some and then refeed it. So it's been staying in the same jar. Don't need to put it in a new jar each time. So inside you can see the hooch, which is a darker colored product, and you see some bubbles. So I know this yeast is still going very strong. So the first thing I'm going to do is, you can see that it's a little more than a cup of starter in there. And as I stir it around, I use a nice clean spatula so I don't contaminate this yeast with another yeast or bacteria. I stir it around. Kind of looks like pancake, a really thick pancake batter, or maybe a muffin batter. So I stir it around. And because it's been in the fridge, I want to get these going again and very active. I'm not going to use some of this starter because I just don't think it's active enough to give me a good puffy loaf. So I'm going to dump off out of this jar about half. And I have just figured out over the years that by keeping half of this starter in here, about half a cup to a cup, keeps it from overflowing the jar. It just keeps the right amount in there every time. So it seems wasteful. We've dumped some starter down the drain, but it's okay. It's worth it. So now I have half of my starter in there, and I'm going to feed it. I keep the lid on all the time because I don't want the yeast in this kitchen or bacteria in this kitchen to get in this jar, because it will contaminate this yeast and it will make it so it's not as pure a yeast from a certain area as it could be. So I use hot water and rinse off the spatula. Hot water, by the way, over 120, 140 will kill the yeast. So then I'm not cross-contaminating anything. So what we want to do to feed the yeast is we put equal amounts of water and flour back into that jar, to just that half a cup to cup of starter. I do it by weighing because I think that keeps it most consistent. If you've ever measured out flour and you scoop it out of there, if you tap the measurement down, all of a sudden the flour settles and then you're adding more. So it's really not a consistent amount each and every time, depending on how compact the flour is. The scale will help you always be consistent, and so that's why I use that. All I do is put a little pan on the scale. I set it to 0, and I take flour, until I reach 90 grams. And like I said, that's just the amount. It doesn't, I could use 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water, whatever I want. I just, for myself, it makes the right amount of starter that fits in that jar. even once it's feeding. So there's 90 grams of flour. I put it on a little piece of parchment or wax paper because that makes it easy to dump in the jar. And now I'm going to measure 90 grams. So 90 grams of water. That's all done. So you might ask yourself, well, why does it have to be equal measures of water and flour to feed this? It doesn't. For my recipe, it does, because I use 100% hydration, and I found that keeps everything very consistent. However, some recipes call for bread that has different levels of water in the starter, and that would be just dependent upon the recipe you use. My recipe says 100% equal water, equal flour for the starter, and so that's why I'm having you do that. So we have our flour and our water already measured out, ready to go. I'm going to open the jar, and I always do the water first, and the reason I do that is that it makes it much more liquidy and I can incorporate the flour more easily in there. So I dump in the water first. You can see the jar has a little crusties on it just because it's been in the jar for a while. Grab a napkin here. Don't worry about that, no problems. Doesn't cause any effect on the starter itself. That's just dried starter on there. So I mix it around with a clean spatula, kind of getting to the bottom if it's kind of gotten gloppy down there. I take my flour, in it goes. Give it a good stir. It's going to get a little gloppy. It's going to be like pancake batter with lumps in it. Scrape off your spatula. I kind of scrape the top of the jar too, just to keep some of the batter down there. And then scrape it off. Take a clean napkin, kind of wipe off any extras. And I put the lid back on slightly loose, I guess is the best way to say it. And that's because as this starts to eat, the yeast will produce a lot of gas, and you just want to make sure it has a way of getting out, because if it really got built up in there, the jar could crack and break. Or, you know, it just kind of causes the lid to bubble up, or it can try to seep through there, and that's a terrible mess. And that's another reason why I only keep a certain amount of starter in here, because when I feed it, I don't want it to bubble up and out of the jar. I want it to stay in the jar. So the amount that I put in and the amount of starter I'm telling you keeps it just the right amount. So that one's all done. And now I'm going to start on this. And I'll show you in about an hour or two, show you what the jar looks like. And you can see that the yeast will become very active. Okay, so it's been a couple of hours since we fed the starters, and I thought you would like to see what it should look like and what, well, I wasn't asking you. Anyway, you're so helpful, Zuzu. These starters have only been in the fridge for a couple of weeks, so they haven't had a lot of time to go dormant, which means that when I feed them, they are going to become more active more quickly. I cannot believe how naughty you are. So, anyway, God, she's not normally naughty, but I think she thinks I'm not paying her enough attention. The doughs are getting more attention than her. Anyway, so, as I was saying, the starters had only been in the refrigerator for a couple of weeks. I fed them a couple of weeks ago because I made some bread. So they are not as dormant as they might be if they had been left in the fridge for a couple of months. And so they're waking up very quickly. And you can see, even after just a couple of hours, they are already starting to bubble up. There's bubbles there. They've already risen up in the jar above where they were to begin with. And if you remember, I told you we have to take some of the starter out of the jar. Otherwise, when we feed it and it starts to become active, it will overflow in the jar. So probably in a couple more hours, we're gonna see the starter all the way up to here. I'm not even sure I removed enough because, boy, it looks like it's really bubbling. And that means they're very active. I could make dough with this probably now, and I would still get a very nice dough with a nice rise because the yeast is so active. Had these been in the fridge for a couple of months, then it may take me a day to get them to be this active. And these little guys are like super, super hungry. You can smell it. You can see the bubbling on the inside, but you can already smell that very yeasty smell to it. So just keep the lid on. You don't have to open them and check them during the day. That's why the jar is so great, because you can keep seeing what exactly is happening in there. So we're still going to let these stay until later. And probably at the end of the day, when you're about ready to check your yeast, we can compare and then go from there what we do. Now, we're going to say that I'm not going to make bread until tomorrow morning. So I'm going to show you how you keep the yeast going, because by tomorrow morning, this would start to not be as hungry and it won't be producing as much gas. So later today, we're going to feed them again so that they are ready and very active for making dough tomorrow.